Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It's the middle of March and it is weather. Gross. The temperature says it's in the mid-30s, but it feels like the mid-20s because it's very breezy. Hopefully my windshield is doing its work on the microphone and you're not just hearing gusting. I decided to take a walk up to the library today to return a book, and I thought I would talk with you a little bit about some games I've played. That's right, because it's time for an espresso triple shot. 3 games, 1 cup of coffee. I haven't figured out how to introduce that yet. For those of you new to the podcast, welcome. The espresso is a short review segment in which I talk about games I've played recently for the first and maybe second time. These are first impressions, so I can't guarantee that these are even very, very skillful observations of what the game's about, but it does give you a sense of whether I think I'll play it again, what I think of the game, and so on. I'm particularly reflecting on this because I read a blog post today. I don't want to name the blogger because that's not really my intent today, but I read a blog post today on Board Game Geek from somebody who had tried Brass Birmingham for the first time. And their reflections on it sort of struck me as the kinds of things you might say after a first play when you don't yet see all of the depth of decision making that comes in the game. Now, this blogger is very experienced and they have a lot of games, and they even admit in the thing, I know I've only played this once, and there are lots of other games I've played where I didn't like them at first and I grew to love them. But they don't know how much they're going to play Brass Birmingham again because they found it kind of boring and blah, blah, blah. Which I thought that was just interesting, given especially the recent rise of Brass Birmingham to be the #1 game of all time on Board Game Geek, and Gloomhaven's descent to number 3 instead of number 2, that it somehow dropped below Pandemic Legacy Season 1, which I think is interesting. I don't know, can you still buy Pandemic Legacy Season 1? Is that still an available commodity, or is it just sitting where it was thing? I think there would be an interesting element to be made by having your game rating go down over time if people aren't adding new ratings to it, that like game ratings should decay or something. I don't know. I also don't like that games have different ratings when they're all part of the same system. Like, if I buy Arkham Horror the card game, I'm generally just rating Arkham Horror the card game throughout, and the expansions don't get onto the Board Game Geek list. But if I buy Gloomhaven, and then I buy Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, and then I buy Frosthaven, those count as 3 separate games. I don't know. It's silly. It's a silly thing to be worried about. But that's not why you're here today. I apologize if my voice is a little scraggly. I had a bug over the weekend and it messed with my voice a little bit. I'm mostly back okay, but I do hear that my voice is a little scratchy, so apologies. So today I'll be talking about 3 games that I've played recently. Only one of these is a game I played in person. The rest of these are games I played online or over Tabletop Simulator. So I don't know, take that into account. The first one I want to mention is Lost Seas. Lost Seas is a tactical strategy game that has appeared on Board Game Arena in the last couple of weeks, or has become very popular in Board Game Arena in the last couple of weeks, or perhaps it's just that the group of people I play games with a lot have become intrigued with Lost Seas, so we've played it several times. So I've played it probably 4 or 5 times now. It's a relatively simple affair if you haven't played it. It's an abstract game where you have a grid of 16 spaces, of 4 columns by 4 rows. And at the beginning of the game, you get 8 scoring tiles, 4 that go along the top and 4 that go along the side. And those scoring tiles have different conditions on them. They could be things like 7 of the same symbol, or 5 of the same symbol, or 2 of this symbol and 1 of that symbol. It's a variety of different ways of saying things about the content of the row or column. And each tile is double-sided. One side is easier to make, one side is harder to make, and of course the easier side is worth fewer points than the harder side, and so on. And then, so at the beginning of the game, you get these tiles in 2 batches of 4, and you arrange them in the row and the column. And once you've got them arranged, then basically it is a drafting game where an offer of tiles will come out, and the first player takes one tile and discards one tile, and then everybody else takes one tile, and the last player has a choice of 2 tiles. They take one, the last one is discarded. And then you rinse and repeat. After 16 rounds, everybody adds up their points to see if they've succeeded in meeting the goals in their rows and columns. Now, the symbols are all things about the water. There's sea serpents and krakens and whirlpools and rocks and ships and desert islands. I think those are the different symbols. And they're arranged in, the tiles have different combinations of those symbols on the tiles. And so when you're putting the tiles into your rows and columns, you're trying to arrange them in ways that meet the criteria for the rows and columns without breaking the criteria of other rows and columns, with the goal of scoring as many as you can. Like I said, it's a tactical abstract game. It could be stars and squares. Like this, the theme means nothing at all. But, you know, as a game, it's amusing. It's interesting. It has some of the crunchiness of something like a Calico, where as you're drafting things, the board gets tighter and tighter. It gets harder and harder to meet your goals, and you have to start giving up on some goals while you aim to make others. And from that perspective, it's pretty neat. A really good little filler game with some interesting choices and lots of opportunity for screwage, because as the first player, you discard a tile. And as often when you're in the middle, you have the choice between a couple different tiles that are sort of equally good for your board, in which case you spend a lot of time looking at other people's boards and trying to figure out which tiles are best for them and then taking those or trashing those. So hate drafting is a big part of the game. You know, all in all, it's fine. Definitely a game I enjoy playing. If people say, hey, you want to try this? Absolutely, in a asynchronous or even synchronous mode. If somebody says, hey, you want to play this at the table? I would say, sure. I'm not going to buy this game. There are enough other games that are like it. If nothing else, just Calico, I think, is a better version of this kind of game. It's interesting and worth checking out. So that's Lost Seas. Next up is Coloretto, is related to Zularetto, which is a game that gets a fair amount of attention over on Board Game Barrage podcast. This is a game in which it's a set collecting game. There's a market of cards and they're in stacks. And on your turn, you can either add to one of the stacks or you can take one of the stacks, but you can't do both. So if you add to a stack, then you have to wait till your next turn to take one. And the thing is that you get to score a certain number of, so the cards come out in different suits or colors, whatever, and you're trying to get a number of cards of the same color. And the tricky part is that you can only score a certain number of those suits. I think 3. So anything you have beyond those 3 count as negative points for you. And so a big part of the game is trying to make the little markets of cards unattractive for your opponents so they won't take them, but keep them as attractive as possible for you so you can take them. I could see where this is the sort of game that would be satisfying as an end of night game every single week. It has a lot of depth of choice and a lot of tactical play, not all that dissimilar from Lost Seas, I'd say, although this one feels more direct, I guess, because the ability to assess someone else's board state goes much faster. The building the market thing feels like a much bigger part of the game. Like, I think you could play Lost Seas and do pretty well never looking at your opponent's board. I suspect the people who are really good at it spend a lot of time looking at their opponent's boards, but I think you can do pretty well never looking. I think in Coloretto, your opponent's tableau is a key part of what you're doing and well worth examining and continuing to think about. Yeah, we just played the one game of it. It's 3 rounds. I think you go through the deck 3 times, score up 3 times, and at the end of the game, whoever has the most points after 3 rounds wins. I thought it was fun. I was glad to play it. Happily play it again. Probably not a game I'm going to seek out just because I have a lot of other games of that weight. But if I didn't, or if I find it at Goodwill or something, I'm definitely getting it. It's a great game, Coloretto. The third game I played is Yut Nori. I played this on a homemade board that my design partner Rob had made. This is a traditional Korean board game, often played during Korean New Year. And in it you have these sticks that essentially function as dice. They are not round, but rather have multi-sides. I think 4 sides, but I don't remember. When you roll them, symbols come up on, or Oh no, I remember the sticks are rounded on one side and flat on the other. So they either land flat side up or flat side down when you roll them. And the combination of flat side up, flat side down determines how much you get to move your pieces on the board. There's this very specific looking board, and your goal is to get your piece, one of your pieces, all the way around the board. And the game, basically, you're chasing, one team is chasing the other team, and you get a number of different choices based on how you roll. It feels very much like a sort of classic abstract game. Interesting to play, and again, I guess the subtitle of this episode should be Great Games for the End of the Night, because all three of these games that I've talked about so far are really good if you have like 20 minutes left and you want to play something. All three of these would work. Now, Yut Nori is much more conversational. Again, it is dice-based, so, I mean, they're not actually dice, but you get what I mean. And so when you roll the sticks, you have a very specific set of options that you get based on the sticks you roll. And so it's more limited in that way, but it's an interesting game nonetheless. Looking online, there's some really nice sets that people have made or you could get. But it's also the kind of game where you could just go look at the Wikipedia page and make one yourself without too much trouble. So if you wanted to try Yut Nori, it would not be too difficult to make it happen. And you should. It's an interesting game. Well worth checking out. That's Yut Nori. Finally, my flashback for today, my revisiting, is Root. A friend invited me to join them for their tabletop simulator game of Root, which is a game I haven't played in quite a while, but I was glad to return to the table and check it out. This time we were playing with a couple expansions that I had not seen before. I'd only ever played base game Root before. This one had, I think, 2 different expansions. You can go look at my top of the stack in February to see what those were. But I played the Marquis de Chat, which I had not played that part before. Usually I'd played the birds before, and I think I played the Woodland Alliance before, but I had not played the cats. So it was fun to play the sort of tyrannical cat figures and play to that strength. As the game went on, it was clear I was losing, and so I did what you should do when you're in a desperate situation. You know, people were telling me like, hey, you got to move against this guy or he's going to win. Hey, you got to move against that guy or he's going to win, right? Like being a pawn in someone else's game isn't really my thing. And I did have a fair number of troops set up. So instead I put a win card into play. Now, if you haven't played Root before, you win by default if you get 20 points, but there are these win condition cards that you can put into play. And if you put one of those into play, then you no longer track points. Instead, you win if you achieve your card. So there's this interesting moment where you can decide, do I want to remove myself from the standard competition and instead put myself in a place of unique competition? But in doing so, I'm painting a huge target on my back. And that's what I decided to do. So on my turn, when it was clear that we were maybe 2 rounds from the end of the game, if other people just kept going the way they were going, I put into play a card that said if I controlled 3 yellow zones at the beginning of my turn, I win the game. And then I immediately took control of 2 of a yellow zone I had not had control of before. So now I was in control of 3. And I piled as many troops onto them as I could and just held on. And of course, they dislodged me, and then I took one back and they dislodged me again. And then someone else won because I had dumped all of my energy into protecting those 2 zones. But you know what? I got to go out on my terms instead of just kind of sitting back and watching the end of the game happen, which if you'll remember my review of Twilight Imperium, that was one of the things I found frustrating about that game, is that by the time we got to round like 7 of the 8 we played, the beginning of round 7, we played 2 more full rounds. It was clear I wasn't going to win. I was far enough behind. There's no way I could win. Well, so then I become just a superfluous thing on the board. All I can do is screw with other people. And that, to me, isn't fun. Like, if I can't get toward winning, where's the fun? I don't want to be a spoiler. So it was nice in Root to at least be able to take my own destiny and say like, hey, you want to win? You got to spend at least some energy making sure I don't win. And it was fun. And some of the players did spend too much energy, and that allowed another player to win. He was probably going to win anyway, but it was fun to have that happen throughout. So that's Root. Not my favorite game, but I definitely had fun on this play of it. And it still falls in the category of like, someone invites me to play Root, Sure, I'll play Root. Am I going to suggest that we play Root? Probably not. Well, that does it for me here on this episode of Pick Up and Deliver. I'm at the library. I'm going to return my book, maybe pick up another one if there's one waiting for me, and then I'll head back home and record another episode for you. Well, thanks for joining me on Walk today. You can reach out to me through Board Game Geek. Wombat929 is my username, or email me, brendan@rattleboxgames.com. Thanks for joining me. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye. Fair amount of attention over on the one with the tanks. Board Game Brawl? That's not it. The one where it's Kellen and the blue tank and the red tank. I can't remember the name of it right now. You know what I'm talking about. Or if you don't, I can help you figure it out. It might be Board Game Brawl, but I don't think so. Anyway, Board Game Barrage. It's Board Game Barrage.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.